The council chamber went dead silent the moment Lord Caelion Draveth placed a letter on the table, his own seal staring back at the man who had forged it. 12 lords. One trap, Tati. And standing in the corner, pen in hand, was a southern woman who had arrived at Thornwall's gates with nothing but a patched cloak and grey eyes that had stopped asking permission for anything. She wasn't supposed to matter. She was supposed to be the distraction, the stranger he'd foolishly let through the gate, the proof of his weakness. That was the plan. Someone else's plan, built around one devastating truth. They had studied Caelion Draveth long enough to know exactly where he would stop his horse. But what they hadn't calculated, what no one had calculated, was her. So why, when the trap finally closed, was she the one holding the key? Watch till the end to find out what really happened that night. The snow had not yet decided to fall properly. It drifted in half-hearted curtains across the road from Greymore, the kind of cold that crept into wool before you noticed it had gotten under your skin. Thornwall's gates rose at the end of the road like the last argument against the dark, 2 torches guttering on either side, casting orange light across the men who stood between the road and the warmth beyond. Elara Voss had been walking for 6 days. She knew this not because she had counted sunrises, but because she had run out of the dried plums she'd taken from the cart before it was attacked. 4 plums per day, 24 total. The cart itself was 2 days behind her, overturned, wheels still spinning when she'd crawled out from beneath a false floor smelling of spilled grain and someone else's blood. She did not think about the someone else. She had learned, in the 12 months since her father's house in Regensburg had been shuttered and sold, that some thoughts were doors best left closed. The gate guard had a broad face, and the expression of a man who had stood in the same cold for too long, and had decided to feel powerful about it. "Papers," he said. "I don't have papers." "Toll, then." "I don't have coin." He looked her over, a patched cloak, boots held together by will and 2 strips of rawhide, grey eyes that had stopped asking permission for anything. "Then you don't come in." Behind her the road stretched back into the cold and into the forest, and beyond the forest was the place where the cart had overturned, and she was not going back. She looked at the guard directly, not at his shoulder, not at the middle distance the way people looked when they were afraid, but at his eyes. "I will stand here," she said. Her voice was steady. She had been practicing steady for a long time. "If I die of cold on this road before the gate of Thornwall, make certain you are the first man asked to account for it." The guard opened his mouth. The sound that stopped him was hooves. She heard him before she saw him, the unhurried rhythm of a horse that knew it was going home. Then the torchlight caught him, dark bay horse, 4 riders behind, but her eyes went to the man in front and stayed there, the way eyes went to fires, not from choice. He was perhaps 30, the kind of face that had been through weather and hadn't apologized for it. Dark hair, a jaw with an old scar along the left side, wide shoulders under a charcoal traveling cloak. He rode like a man who had never gotten off. He saw her immediately. His eyes, grey, the precise colour of steel cooled properly, moved from her face to the gate guard, to the guard's expression, and back to her in the space of a breath. "Open the gate," he said. The guard half turned. "My lord, this woman has no V." "I know she doesn't." His voice was not raised. "It didn't need to be. Open the gate." The gate opened. He walked his horse through, and Elara walked through after him. She did not say thank you. She did not know yet whether it would mean I am grateful or I am beholden, and these were different things. She was almost past his horse when he spoke. "You're cold." He was still mounted, which meant she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes, and she did it without hesitating. "Yes," she said. He reached up and unclasped the brooch at his collar, not dramatic, not ceremonial, the way you might hand someone an umbrella in the rain. The cloak slid off his shoulders. He held it out from the saddle. She took it. He swung down in one motion, landed without sound, and turned to face her for the first time properly. Up close he was taller than she'd expected, and the scar in his jaw was longer than the torchlight had suggested, running from his chin toward his left ear in a thin white line that had healed clean. Someone had known what they were doing with a needle. She put the cloak around her own shoulders. It was heavy and immediately, distinctly warm, the heat of the body that had been wearing it. It smelled of wood smoke and oiled leather, and something underneath both of those things she decided not to try to name. "Where are you going?" he asked. The crowd that had gathered watched with the particular silence of people who had realized they were witnessing something they had no context for. "I was asking myself that question," she said, "when you arrived." 3 seconds. He looked at her with an expression she could not interpret, not surprise exactly, not displeasure exactly. Behind him, one of his riders swallowed a sound. "Bridget," he said. "The Ember Crown, West Road, she'll have a room." He turned to take his horse's bridle. "She'll have a room?" He walked his horse toward the stable yard without looking back. Elara stood with his cloak around her shoulders and felt several things simultaneously she did not have immediate words for. He knows the name of every person in this place, she thought. That is either generosity or control. Probably both. I should remember they are not the same thing. The Ember Crown was low-ceilinged, fire-bright, walls of dark stone that had absorbed years of hearth heat and breathed it back out. The woman behind the counter had gray hair and arms that suggested she had done, at some point, physical work that city women never did. She looked at Elara in the doorway. She looked at the cloak. "Caelion Draveth gave you that." "Not a question." "He put it over my shoulders. I didn't catch his name." "That's his name." Bridget set down the cup she was drying. "Lord of everything you've seen since you crossed the Greymoor Ridge. 12 years he's been lord, and in 12 years I have not once seen him stop his horse for a stranger." Elara absorbed this. "Is there a room?" "There's always a room. Sit down before you fall down." Later, in the small room upstairs, Elara sat on the edge of the bed and looked at the cloak folded over the chair. She did not romanticize the gesture. The man had seen a woman standing in the cold, removed an obstacle, given her something warm. Practical actions. He had simply stopped. He has never stopped for a stranger. The fire in the hearth was small but sufficient. She lay down and stared at the ceiling, and for a long time she did not sleep. In the last moment before exhaustion made the decision for her, she was still thinking about gray eyes that had read her like a map and found something worth stopping for. She decided, firmly, the way she decided most things, that she would figure it out in the morning. She was downstairs before Bridget opened the shutters. The fire had gone to embers. Elara had built it back up, swept the hearthstone, swept the whole front room, and found the ledger beneath the counter by the time Bridget came down the stairs. Bridget stopped at the bottom step, looked at the swept floor, looked at the fire, looked at Elara with the ledger. "You read?" "Latin and Old French. Your accounts for October have a transposition error in column 3. The grain invoice should read 14 shillings, not 40. Bridget poured herself a cup from the pot Elara had also put on and sat down. "Can you add?" "Yes." "The whole ledger is a disaster." "I noticed. I work for room and board. Bridget looked at her for a long moment. Done. No ceremony. Two practical people at a practical conclusion. 3 days settled into their own small rhythm. The morning accounts, the noon rush of traders from the East Road, the quieter afternoons that smelled of bread and wet wool drying near the fire. Elara found that she liked the work, not because it was interesting, but because it was hers, temporary and uncomplicated, accountable to no one who knew her history or expected her to be anything in particular. There was a specific freedom in being new to a place, in being unknown. She had been unknown before, in other towns, in other winters. The difference was that here she felt herself actually looking at the shape of the territory, at the way the traders talked about the roads, at the names that came up in the same breath as confidence versus the names that came up with something quieter underneath. Power had its own geography, and if you paid attention to it long enough, you could read it the same way you read a room. Caelion Draveth's name came up in every conversation that mattered, and almost never in the ones that didn't. In the market that morning, she saw him on foot. In her head, he was still on the horse, at that elevated remove that made him difficult to read. But he was walking with deliberate attention beside a farmer who was explaining something at length, gesturing toward his field. Caelion Draveth was listening. Not performing it, not the glazed nodding she'd grown up watching powerful men deploy. He was actually listening, body still, turned slightly toward the farmer, and when the man paused, Caelion spoke briefly and turned to the rider at his shoulder, the tall one with rust-colored hair, who made a note on folded parchment. Elara watched for 10 seconds. Then Caelion raised his head in the automatic scan of a man who'd made watchfulness a reflex, and she turned to examine the yarrow stall with sudden intense focus. The most dangerous man in this territory is standing in the cold, listening to a drainage problem, she thought. A sword I can plan around. A man who actually pays attention is harder to anticipate. She stayed at the yarrow stall longer than was necessary. She did not look back. When she finally moved on to the spice merchant, she was aware, with the particular awareness that only certain kinds of attention produced, that she was not being watched. She checked. She was not. She found she was not sure whether that was better or worse. That evening, Bridget sat by the fire, after closing, and talked the way people did when something had gone untold for too long. She talked about a night 12 years ago, a 20-year-old with a dead father and a bandaged sword hand sitting in the upstairs room. Bridget had been the one to stitch the cut. He sat in that chair for 3 hours, not a word, looking at the wall. I kept the fire going because it was something to do. Just before dawn, he stood up and walked to the window. She paused. He said, "Who knows about this?" I said, "Just me." He said, "Good." And then he went downstairs and started running the territory, and he hasn't stopped since. Does he ever rest? Elara said. Bridget considered. He sleeps. He eats. He reads. Whether any of it does what rest is supposed to do. She tilted her head. There are rooms in him that have been locked a long time, and the keys are somewhere I've never been shown. The fire shifted. A log settled. He never married, Elara said. No. So. Bridget looked at her sideways. Nobody asks him why, not directly. I'm not asking. I know. A pause. That's interesting too. Elara looked at the fire. Outside, the wind had found its voice for the night, working its way through the gaps in the shutters with a sound like something trying to make itself heard. He stopped for you, Bridget said after a while. Not an accusation, simply a fact being held up to the light. He stood at those gates 100 times at that hour, come through them 1,000 times in 12 years, I've been here for every winter. I've seen every arrival." She refilled her cup without looking up. He stopped his horse. "He gave you his cloak off his back while snow was still falling, and then he told you my name and where to find me." She looked over. "Caelion Draveth doesn't do things without a reason, but I don't think he knew the reason that night. I think he just did it." "That's the most unsettling version of what you could say," Elara said. "Yes," Bridget agreed. "I know." He came to the inn 4 days later. The common room was loud with a trading caravan from the East Road. Elara was moving between tables with a tray when the door opened, and the room changed the way rooms changed when certain people walked in. 2 seconds of silence, then the noise resumed around it like water closing over a stone. Caelion went to the corner table, angled to the wall, clear line of sight to both doors, and sat down. Bridget appeared with wine before he'd settled. Elara was at the window tables, back to the corner. She felt the change in the room's geometry before she turned. He was already watching her. Not the performance of someone caught looking, simply watching, directly, with the same unhurried attention he brought to everything. She carried her tray to his table. "Wine's already there." "I see that." "Then what do you need?" "The cloak. It's in your room." "On the chair, yes. I haven't found an occasion to return it." "I know. A beat. I haven't come to collect it." She looked at him. He looked back. The room made its noise around them. "Do you want it back?" The pause was not long. It was exactly long enough to be deliberate. "No. I'll." "Then I'll keep it." She turned. "Elara." She stopped. "Sit down, when you have a moment." She looked back at him. That careful, contained expression she was beginning to think might simply be his face in its natural state, held in reserve not from coldness, but from long practice. "When I have a moment," she said. She finished her round. She sat down. He asked about her route. She told him about Aldenmore, the last real town before the North roads got difficult, and about the woman she'd met there. Young, 19 perhaps, hair nearly silver in bad light, dark green coat. She knew my name when I hadn't given it. Caelion set down his wine cup. "She knew your name." "Used it twice before I'd introduced myself. My father was a physician. He taught me to watch before I speak." She mentioned work in the north, specifically named Thornwall, specifically named Thornwall, specifically named Bridget. She also suggested a place called Sayholm, a day east of the Greymore Pass. Caelion was quiet for a moment, his stillness a different texture in the firelit noise, the stillness of a man selecting very carefully between too many things to say. "Sayholm was razed 9 months ago. There's no one there." So she was sending me to an empty ruin, as a secondary option, with Thornwall as the primary. His voice was even. "Stay at the Ember Crown. Don't take work from people you haven't met here." "Why?" "Because someone went to some trouble to put you here, and I don't yet know who or why." He's not worried about me, she thought. He is worried about something I'm standing in the middle of. Those are different shapes of concern. "All right," she said. "I'll stay." She stood to collect her tray. "Elara." She stopped. "The woman in Aldenmore. You'd recognize her." "I remember people," she said. "It's the first thing my father taught me." She walked back toward the window tables. She felt him watching her go and did not turn around, because turning around would have told him something she wasn't ready to give away yet. She wasn't entirely sure what it was. That was also useful information. The knife came on a market day. Elara was buying dried time near the North Square when she heard the shout, one voice, then the collective intake of breath a crowd made when something happened it hadn't prepared for. She had a clear line of sight. Caelion stood 20 feet away with 2 guards, neither of them Aldrich. She noticed the absence the way she noticed anything out of pattern, as information before anything else. The man with the knife was already past the first guard. Caelion moved left. The blade caught his forearm instead of the young guard's neck. She knew it was intentional. She knew it in the instant she watched his arm come across, the choice made in the fraction before the blade found him. He stood after it the way he'd stood before it, feet planted, head up, and looked at the wound the way a man looked at damage done to something he was responsible for maintaining. No flinch. No sound. That is not composure under pressure, she thought, moving already, her bag off her shoulder. That is a man who does not consider himself the primary concern in any room he's in. That is the thing that will get him killed. She pushed through the crowd's edge. Let me see. One of the young guards put a hand up. She went around it. My father was a physician. I've been washing wounds since I was 8. Stand still. He stood still. The hall 2 buildings east was mostly empty. Long table, candles lit against gray winter light. She sat him near the window and opened her bag. This is going to be uncomfortable. Proceed. No. She poured spirits over the cloth and pressed it to the wound. The muscle in his jaw tightened once, controlled, then released. She watched it and kept her hands steady, the most useful thing she could do. She began to wrap, fingers working upward from the wrist in the pattern she'd learned at 10 years old. Her hands were small against the diameter of his forearm. She was aware of this in a way that existed entirely separate from the medical task, but coexisted with it. Why did you step out of the crowd? He asked. Because no one else did. She pulled the next strip taut. My father said, when you don't know what to do the most correct thing you know. I know how to clean wounds. You're not afraid of me. I was afraid of you yesterday. Today you're bleeding and asking questions I'd expect from someone younger. Context changes things. She didn't look up. Hold still. She tied the second knot and smoothed the bandage flap. He died in Regensburg, she said before he could ask. A fever that spread through the lower quarter. He didn't leave when he could have. He said a physician who left when patients couldn't was just a man who owned a bag. He was a good man. You can't know that. I know it, he said, because you don't resent him for dying. Her hand stopped on his wrist. She was not touching the wound. She was simply not moving, her fingers at the inside of his wrist where the pulse was, perfectly steady, and the two of them in the winter quiet of the empty hall. She searched for the right word and landed on unfair. Done, she said. Her voice was normal, completely normal, except that it took her just slightly longer than usual to start it. She stood and began repacking her bag. Change it this evening. Clean water only. Keep it dry 3 days. Will you check it? She paused at the door. Did not turn around. If you come to the inn, yes. She went out into the cold, stood in the market air for a moment, and told herself very firmly that she was not going to think about the pulse rate. Then she thought about it for the entire walk back to the Ember Crown. He came that night. The common room was quieter. Elara was at the back desk, Brigid's ledger open in front of her, when she heard the door and then heard his footsteps, which she had, apparently, already memorized, moving toward her. He sat across the desk. She finished the line she was writing, which was about oat prices in November, and put down the pen. The other sleeve, she said. He laid his forearm on the desk. She moved the candle closer, unwrapped the dressing, checked. Clean edges, no heat, no redness. She began rewrapping. He watched her do it. The scar on his jaw caught the candle's light, its quiet line down toward his collar. "You didn't need to do this," he said. "I know. Then why?" She finished the wrap, tied the knot, and held the bandage in place, longer than was strictly necessary, her thumb at the inside of his wrist. She looked up. His face was 10 inches from hers. The gray in his eyes was layered in the candlelight, the way slate looked wet. He was waiting with the same complete attention he brought to everything, leaving her the space to fill. "Because I wanted to," she said. Entirely simple, which was the only honest version. Something shifted in his expression, the small giving way of held resistance. "There's work in the keep," he said. "The archive. Council session in 5 days. The Eastern Territory records are 3 months behind." "Why me?" "Because you didn't ask what I wanted before you bandaged the wound." She picked up the pen. "When do you need me there?" "Tomorrow morning. Aldrich will take you ahead." "All right," she said. She listened to him leave. She did not watch. She picked up the pen again and wrote a single line in the margin of the ledger that had nothing to do with oat prices, and then crossed it out so thoroughly that it could not be read. Draveth Keep was built to look wrong from a distance and right up close. From the ridge road, a fist of black stone thrust from the cliff above the river Seren. Up close, a forge making noise and heat in the south courtyard, children crossing the inner yard with focused purpose, the smell of bread from the kitchens. Power in motion, Elara thought, not power on display. Aldrich rode ahead, without speaking. She had not tried to make him speak. By the halfway point she understood he was not hostile. He was afraid of something, some variable she introduced into a calculation he was already struggling to balance. She marked it and said nothing. At the edge of the Greymore forest, she saw a light deep in the pines, small, stationary, patient. Not a woodcutter's lamp. A watcher. "Someone's watching the road," she said. Aldrich answered too quickly. "Patrol riders." "Patrol riders move," she thought, watching the light until the trees covered it. She said nothing. She marked it. The archive was genuinely catastrophic, not maliciously disordered, simply the accumulation of everything set down quickly in favor of something more urgent, months compounding into years until every surface held an archaeology of crises. She put her bag on the window ledge, pulled back her sleeves, and began. She worked in the way her father had taught her to work on a difficult case, not by trying to understand everything at once, but by establishing what she could see clearly and building outward from it. The land surveys from the last 3 years were the most consistent, so she started there. By midday, she had a wall of organized documents and a clearer picture of what was missing than what was present. The absences were as interesting as the records. 3 months before the border incident with the Eastern Territories, no account. The period surrounding a collapsed treaty with the Riverlords, 3 weeks of correspondence, simply gone. Someone had been removing things. Not carelessly, not frantically, but with the deliberate patience of someone who knew what they were looking for. She put those gaps in her father's journal, the small leather one she'd carried from Regensburg, the one that had survived the cart and the cold and every road between then and now. She wrote them down because bothering things went in the journal. This was one of her father's rules that she had kept even after she could no longer ask him why. 2 hours in, she found the other journal. Small, dark leather, compressed handwriting that moved at speed. Someone who thought faster than they wrote. The first entry was dated 12 years ago. She closed it. She thought about what Bridget had told her. He never wrote in it again after that night. The kind of grief that couldn't continue in the format it had started in, that required the closing of a whole method of witness. She set it on the corner of the desk, separate from everything else, and went back to work. Isolde brought the evening tray, 30, perhaps, dark circles under blue eyes, a 4-year-old at her hip who regarded every adult in the keep as a supporting character in his own ongoing drama. His name was Luca. Elara found this entirely reasonable. Isolde set the tray down without warmth. Then she saw the journal on the corner of the desk. "He sat in this room the night after," she said. "No candles. He sat in the dark for most of the night. In the morning I brought bread, and he ate it, and then he walked downstairs, and it was done." A pause. "He doesn't speak about things." "He's not cold," she added suddenly, as if answering an argument that hadn't happened yet. "He carries things inside. He just doesn't set them down in front of people." "I know," Elara said. "I can see that." Isolde met her eyes. Something shifted. She left without the tray. Luca stayed. He installed himself on the floor beside Elara's chair and began to draw on a scrap of parchment with a charcoal stub, working with the focused intensity of someone engaged in very serious business. Elara looked at the drawing, what appeared to be a horse, or possibly a cow with architectural ambitions, and then looked back at her work. They sat in companionable silence for a long time. He arrived in the afternoon with snow still in his hair, and Elara nearly walked into him in the corridor. "Come to the library when you have a moment," he said. She noticed he had stopped saying "if you have a moment." She filed this without comment. The library was above the archive, small but given the best window in the north tower, the one facing the river. Close-set shelves, a low fire, a reading chair. Elara found him not in the chair but on the floor, back against the shelving, a book open across his knee. She stood in the doorway a moment. "There's a chair." "I know." She crossed the room and sat on the floor beside him, back against the same shelving, close enough to read the book's title. He looked at her. "There's a chair," he said. "I know." Something moved at the corner of his mouth, not a smile, but the recognition of the possibility of one. "Page 47, he said. "There's an older map of the river basin than the ones in my official records." She took the book. The map was in faded ink, the river marked at 3 places that appeared in none of the documents she'd been sorting. "You've read this." "Most of what's here." She looked at the shelves, the spines faded at the top where hands had pulled them repeatedly, the worn corners of the most visited one. Her father's shelves had looked exactly like this. "And yet your archive is a catastrophe," she said. "That's why I needed help." He turned a page. "I needed to trust the person who knew where everything was. And you trust me. You found the journal. You put it to one side, without reading it." "It wasn't mine to read." A silence. Wind against the stone walls. "What did your father teach you first?" he said. "To read a body before I read a symptom. He said anyone can learn the list of signs. Learning to look at the actual person takes longer." She turned the book sideways to read a margin notation. "He said most physicians looked at their patients, and the best ones looked with them." "How did he die?" "Fever. Eastern quarter of Regensburg. He didn't leave when he could." She smoothed the page. "He said a physician who ran was just a man carrying equipment. He was a good man." "You can't." "I know it because you haven't resented him for dying." He said it quietly. "People who resent the dead talk about them differently. You talk about him like someone who made the right choice, and you're still living inside it." Her hands were still on the page. The fire made its small sound. "That," she said carefully, "is the most accurate thing anyone has said to me in 2 years." She looked up at him. In the library's low light, the planes of his face were different than in the corridors. The jaw, the scar below it, the quality of a man who did not rest easily even in the places he'd built for rest. "Tell me about Theron," she said. He didn't move for a moment. Then he turned and held her gaze. "He was the man who put a sword in my hand when I was 8, taught me to ride, to read a map, to read a face. He told me the only man worth fearing was the one who understood you." A pause. "He understood me completely, and he killed my father with that knowledge." "You haven't forgiven yourself," she said, "for not seeing it." His jaw set. "The people who betray us study us while we trust them," she said. "They pay attention to us while we look outward. That is their advantage, not your failure." She paused. "My father said the smartest physician he knew failed to diagnose his own illness until the very end. Because we are built to look outward. We examine everyone except the people we love." "It doesn't feel that way." "I know it doesn't." She met his eyes. "But it's true anyway." The fire, the wind, the warm silence of a room that had been lived in long enough to carry the warmth of the people who'd sat in it. After a while, she said, "I need to tell you something about Aldenmore." She told him everything. The girl, the exact wording she'd written in her father's journal the same night because bothering things went in the journal, the mention of Seyholm, the knowledge of her name. When she finished, he said, "Describe her again." 19. Hair that looked silver in overcast light. Forest green coat. She had a habit of looking at her hands when she talked. Not distracted, more like she was reading something there. She was nervous and covered it well. Elara paused. "She was given specific information about you. The phrasing, no. The phrasing." She opened her journal. "He will stop. He always stops for the ones who ask for nothing. 3 days is sufficient." Caelion's stillness was different now. Heavier. "They know you," she said. "The way Theron knew you. They mapped your character and built a mechanism around it. They used your decency as a lever." She closed the journal. "That makes me a tool in someone's plan. I find that considerably more upsetting than being in physical danger. Most people would put those in the other order. Most people haven't thought about it long enough." He looked at her. Outside, the wind made its argument with renewed force. "Stay inside the keep walls tomorrow," he said. "The day after is the council, 12 lords. And someone is planning to present evidence that you're a southern spy I've been harboring." "How do you know that?" "Because Seyholm is rubble and the girl was nervous, and you've run this territory for 12 years without a misstep. If someone wants to discredit you, the council is when they do it. The timing isn't coincidence." He looked at her for a long moment. "Stay in the keep." "I heard you." She looked at the fire. The log had burned down to a deep orange core. The kind that held its heat long after the flame was gone. She thought about the light she'd seen in the Greymore pines, small, stationary, patient, and about Aldrich's answer that had come too quickly, and about the shape of the thing she was beginning to see, the way you saw the outline of land in fog before you could name it. "There are records missing," she said. "From the archive, 3 months before the border incident, the period around the collapsed river treaty. Someone removed them carefully. Not in panic, not at random. They knew what they were looking for." He was quiet for a moment. "How long have you known?" "Since this afternoon." "You didn't tell me." "I'm telling you now. I wanted to finish the picture before I showed it to you." She met his eyes. Your archive tells me someone has been inside this keep long enough to know where the important things were kept, long enough to take them without being seen. The fire settled, a sound like a door closing softly in a house where everyone else was asleep. Stay in the keep, he said again. I know, she said. I will. She found the letter at the second hour past midnight. She had not slept, her mind moving in the way it moved when information was almost but not quite complete. When the keep went quiet, she lit her candle and went to the archive, looking for the shape of the absences she'd found in 2 days of sorting, records missing for the 3 months before a border incident, accounts gone for the period when a treaty had collapsed. Someone had removed things. The absences had a pattern. She was reconstructing it when she heard the footstep. Aldrich came around the corner from the back gate in a plain dark coat with travel dust on it, at the hour when no one should be coming in from anywhere. They stopped at the same moment. "What are you doing here?" he said. "Getting records. You?" "Checking the watch rotation." "Alone, without a weapon, from the back gate." 5 seconds of silence. His face was doing something complicated. Not hostility, not guilt, but something adjacent to both, with exhaustion underneath. "Go to your room, Elara." Then, very quietly, "Please." It was the please that told her everything. No hardness in it. Not a threat, not a dismissal. Something closer to a prayer. "I'm going to find out," she said. "Whatever it is, you should know that." She went back to the archive. The letter was between pages 340 and 341 of a 9th century chronicle, pushed into the spine as if placed for retrieval, and then left too long. Fresh iron, gall, ink. A hurrying hand, not a hiding one. She read it 3 times. The girl will arrive. He will stop for her. He always stops for the ones who ask nothing. 3 days of his attention is sufficient. While he is occupied, we present the evidence to the council. A southern stranger in the keep, brought there by the Lord's own hand, they will hear it. When they have heard it, his position weakens. A weakened position requires compromise. The marriage alliance is the only exit he will be offered. She sat with it. They mapped him, she thought. They used his decency as a lever, and they used me as the fulcrum. Not the cold anger of someone being used. She had survived that in other shapes. The specific hot anger of someone measured by strangers without her knowledge, and found to fit a purpose she had not consented to. She took out her own journal. She wrote down the letter word for word, the way her father had taught her to record anything that might need to be recalled exactly. Not the meaning, not the summary, but the precise and unalterable word. Then she folded the original letter carefully and tucked it between the pages. The door moved. The girl in the doorway was the one from Aldenmore. She was in keep staff linen, pale with the paleness of someone who had been making a decision for a long time, and had finally arrived at the moment where it couldn't be put off. Her eyes went to the letter on the desk. "You already found it?" 5 minutes ago. Elara did not stand. "Sit down." Her name was Sierra. Her brother Pell had been in custody for 7 months, which was slightly longer than he could have been expected to survive. Malacca, Lord of Gareth, the territory east of Greymore, had given her a task. Find a southern stranger with documented skills and no local connections, direct her to Thornwall, then enter the keep as hired staff and observe. He said no one would be hurt. He said I would only need to watch and report. "And when you got here?" "I saw what it was." She looked at her hands. "He described a political target. That is not what this is." Elara looked at her for a moment. The girl was genuinely afraid, not the performing kind of fear, not the kind people wore when they wanted to seem innocent. She was sitting with both hands flat on her knees, very still, the way people went still when they were trying to keep something inside from getting out. "Tell me the rest," Elara said. "From the beginning." Sierra told her. It took a long time. When she was finished, the candle had burned down a third, and the fire had gone to soft coals, and outside the keep, the night was deep and completely silent. "There's a duplicate," Sarah said. "Of a letter? Malachar sent one to Aldrich 14 months ago. The arrangement, the terms, with his seal on the lower edge. He kept a copy. I saw it." "Where? Where?" "In the record chest in his study at Gareth. Left side. Third from the top. Green wax seal, with the Gareth falcon." Elara wrote this down. "Why are you telling me this?" she said. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Because I came here to watch a man being brought down, and what I found instead was—" She stopped, looked at her hands. "He knows the name of the cook's daughter. He remembers what the grain merchant's wife was ill with last winter, and asks after her. The man in the stable yard with the broken arm. He went himself to check the splinting." A pause. "Malachar described a lord who had stopped caring about his territory. That is not what this is." "No," Elara said. "It isn't." She folded the letter back into the journal. She looked at Sarah, 19 years old, silver hair in the candlelight, hands that had been reading their own palm since the first day Elara had met her, as if the answer to something was written there. "Tomorrow," Elara said, "I need you to tell me exactly where Aldrich's sister is being kept." Then she said, "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be complicated." She knocked on his door before sunrise. He opened it in a linen shirt with the collar untied, dark hair slightly disordered, eyes completely awake. A man whose body had decided wakefulness was safer than sleep and kept the habit regardless. He looked at her face, then at the journal in her hands. She held it out without speaking. He read the letter. His face did not change, not because nothing was happening, but because a great deal was happening, and the management of it required all available resource. She had watched her father receive terrible news across a sickbed. She knew the difference. "Malachar. I thought you'd recognize it. I've known he was a problem for 6 months. I did not know he'd put someone inside the keep." He said it without emphasis, which made it worse. The way a completely still body of water was worse than choppy water. "There's more. Tell me." She told him. Aldrich in the corridor, the back gate, the wrong hour. The pattern in the missing records. Sarah and her brother Pell, and the 7 months. And the duplicate letter, green wax, the Gareth falcon, third from the top on the left side of the record chest. When she finished, he put the letter in his shirt pocket and said, "Go back to your room." "No." He looked at her. "You're going to Aldrich's room," she said. "You shouldn't do that alone. Not because I think you'll hurt him. Because you're going to want to, and having another person present is the only thing that makes whatever he says a conversation and not an interrogation. You need it to be a conversation." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he turned and walked down the corridor, and she walked beside him. Aldrich opened his door at the first knock. Dressed. Awake. He moved back and held the door open and said nothing. He sat on the edge of his bed with his hands between his knees, and for the first time he looked his age rather than the age his soldiering had imposed on him. "Liza," Caelion said. 8 months ago, the flatness of a story told too many times in one's own head. "Malachar has her. Do small things," he said. "Nothing that looks like treason. She stays comfortable and comes home." He looked at his hands. "I asked for proof she was alive. He sent me her ring, our mother's ring. Why didn't you come to me? The most painful kind of question, asked by someone who already knows the answer and needs it said aloud. Because you would have mobilized, and before you reached her, Aldrich stopped. And because you cannot start a border war over one person, even your sister. He looked up. His eyes were dry, which was the worst thing about it. I know what you can afford and what you can't. Small enough not to matter. The night at the market, Elara said quietly. Aldrich closed his eyes. Malachar needed 3 days. The attack was insurance. He wanted you occupied and off balance. He told me to create a gap in the guard rotation. He said it was going to be a confrontation, a disturbance, not a blade. He opened his eye. I'm sorry. That was beyond what I thought I was agreeing to. You thought, Caelion said. Yes. Elara moved to stand by the wall. This was not her moment. 2 men who had been brothers in everything except blood, and one of them had made a choice the other had to live with. Is she alive? Caelion said. Val? Malachar says yes. Then this is what happens. You come with me when I go to Gareth after the council. You take me to where he's keeping her. That's how you pay the debt. And what I've done. We'll discuss that after Liza is home. A silence. Caelion known. Alice? Don't. He turned toward the door. Stopped. Stood with his back to the room for a moment. Then, just slightly, not turning fully around, she's your sister. I understand why you didn't come to me. I don't forgive the choice, but I understand it. He walked out. Elara stayed a moment longer. Aldrich was looking at the floor, his hands still between his knees, his face the face of a man who had been carrying something until the carrying had bent him permanently, and he'd stopped noticing. He meant it, she said quietly. Both parts. Aldrich looked up, said nothing, but something in the set of his jaw shifted, just slightly, just enough. She followed Caelion out into the corridor. The council took place in the Great Hall. 12 lords around a table, long enough to give everyone the fiction of equal status. Narrow enough that no one could pretend they weren't in direct proximity to everyone else. Malachar arrived with the confidence of a man who had planned for every scenario. Caelion let him sit. Let the other lords settle. Let the fire be stoked and wine pour. He waited with a patience that Elara, watching from the note-taking corner, found extraordinary. The patience of someone who had already won, and was simply waiting for the room to catch up. Then he put a letter on the table in front of Malachar. The letter Sarah had identified as a duplicate, the one Malachar had sent to Aldrich 14 months ago, establishing the arrangement with Malachar's own seal on the lower edge. I received this 3 days ago, Caelion said, from the woman you placed in my household to surveil it. The table went very still. Not by force, Elara thought, watching Malachar's face. Not by threat. By preparation. He had already built the trap before Malachar could spring his own. Malachar opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the seal, his own seal, looking back at him from the wrong side of the table, and something in his face made the calculation and came up empty. The room did the rest. She was in the library when he found her. She had sorted the council notes, labeled them, put them in the right place. Because the work was there and because she had discovered this week, the kind of person who organized things when she was trying not to feel them, which was not the most sophisticated coping mechanism, but it was effective. The library was dim. She had been there perhaps an hour, sitting on the floor against the shelving, not reading, just being in a room that had come to feel, in the last several days, like one of the safest rooms she'd ever been in. She heard him on the stairs. He came in and sat in the chair, not the floor, and put his elbows on his knees and held his face in his hands for a moment. Not dramatically, just in the way of a man with no audience, who could briefly stop performing steadiness. After a moment, he took his hands from his face and looked at the fire. He looked tired in the specific way that people who held things together got tired when they finally stopped holding. "Hell is being brought back," he said. "And Lysa. Aldrich knows the roads. Sira is with the escort. She came forward before it was over." A pause. "That means something." "It means everything," Elara said. A silence. "Elara," he said. Something in the way he said it, just the quality of a man speaking her name because it was the right word for where he was, made her hold very still. "Stay, Annie?" She waited. "Not for the archive, not for the council, not because I owe you anything." He turned and looked at her. 2 weeks ago I would have told you I haven't needed anyone here, except for the territory's function. I would have believed it. He paused. "The last 2 weeks I have sat in this room with you, and it is the first time in 12 years I have not spent every moment calculating whether I'm presenting the right face to the right person." "You're saying," she said carefully, "that you want me to stay because you can relax around me." "I'm saying it better than that." "Are you?" He looked at her steadily. 12 years of running this territory, maintaining every alliance, managing every threat, constructing every relationship from this table, a nod toward the keep below them. That is work, all of it, even the parts that look like rest. With you, in this room I have sat on the floor and talked about my dead father's tutor, and let you look at a wound on my wrist and not spent one moment wondering what you would do with any of the fire. "That is the most honest thing I have to offer," he said. "It's not much." "It's the most anyone has offered me," Elara said, "in the same period of time." She stood, crossed the room, sat in the chair across from his, close, not touching, but the firelight reached both of them. "I'll stay until spring," she said. Something shifted in his face. "Spring runs long here." "I've been told." She met his eyes. "You've just used the weather as a negotiating position." "I've been aware that I was doing it." "That's worse." The corner of his mouth moved. Not the full thing, the precursor, the small seismic change before the actual event. "Stay until the summer," he said. "If you still want to go in June." "And if I don't?" "Then we'll discuss what comes after June." The fire, the wind at the window, the warm, close air of a room full of books and old paper and wood smoke, and the specific weight of 2 people in a small space that had stopped being tense and become something without a clean name, but with a precise quality. "All right," she said. Bridget came to the keep in the first week of March with a consignment of herbs and the direct gaze of a woman checking on an investment. She found Elara and Isolde arguing about the filing system for records that crossed both trade and military ledgers. Luca was on the floor beside Elara's chair with a charcoal stick, drawing what appeared to be a horse, but might have been a very athletic goat. He had claimed the space at Elara's feet as his preferred working area over the last 3 weeks, and treated removal as a temporary setback rather than a conclusion. Bridget stood in the doorway and looked at all of it. Then she went to the kitchen, sat down with a cup of tea, and was privately and thoroughly satisfied. Finn's verdict came when Elara brought him the boot that had finally surrendered after 4 months of determined use. He turned it over in his large hands. I can fix this. What do I owe you? Nothing, same as before. He set the boot down. You staying? Until spring. The Lord said spring runs to June here. Finn looked at her with the expression of a man who had watched Caelion Draveth for 12 years and knew exactly what it meant when he quoted the calendar at someone. He talked to you about the local weather, Finn said. He mentioned the growing season. The laugh came like a thunderclap. Serious, he said, recovering. That's serious business. Lord Caelion Draveth has never in my recollection discussed the agricultural calendar with a person unless he was trying to keep them here longer, in 12 years. He was stating a meteorological fact. That's what I'm saying. Elara considered this. Fix the boot, she said. Finn laughed all the way to the forge. Spring arrived the way it arrived in the north, not in a single event, but in a series of small permission. The ice on the river gave way by sections. The mud in the south courtyard softened, and then dried, and then softened again. The light changed, longer each day, the quality of it different. The same light that fell on frozen ground, now falling on something that was beginning to consider the possibility of growing. Elara noticed she had stopped counting the days. She noticed other things, too. The way she had learned to read his footsteps, the slight difference between his step when he came looking for her specifically, and the sound of him simply passing through. The way she had come to know which problems he brought to the archive versus which ones he sat with in silence until they resolved themselves, and how to tell the difference. The way Luca had expanded his artistic subject matter to include not only horses and alleged goats, but also portraits of every person in the keep, hers appearing one morning on the corner of the desk, rendered in charcoal with remarkable accuracy and a slightly heroic brow. She kept it. She was not entirely sure what that meant. She had decided not to examine it too closely. The answer came on a night in late March, when the fire in the library was the largest it had been all winter, and the wind outside had finally, tentatively, begun to suggest spring rather than threaten it. She had been trying to ask the question for 3 weeks. Why did you stop your horse, she said, at the gate that first night? You didn't know me. He was at the table with a map. He set down the pen and looked at the fire. The guard was leaning toward you, he said, trying to use his height to make you smaller, the way men do when they want to remind you that you need something from them. A pause. You were looking straight ahead, not at him, not at the gate, at the road past the gate, the road you were going to take once the obstacle was removed. She said nothing. I've seen people turned away from that gate. Most look down, some beg. Some try to make themselves smaller to make the guard more comfortable. He looked at her. You were cold. I could see that. You'd been walking for days. And you were standing in 2 inches of snow looking at the road past the gate, as if the gate was something you were already through. I was terrified, she said. I know you were. His voice was quiet. That's why I stopped. Anyone can stand straight when they're not afraid. It takes something else to be afraid and still look forward. The fire. You have the power to command me to stay, she said. I know. But you never have. No. Though? Why? He looked at her across the table, across the fire, across whatever space had been getting smaller since a night in January when she had sat beside him on a library floor. Because I don't want you here because I commanded it. I want you here because you chose to be. She stood, walked to the window where the thin new cold came off the glass, looked out at the keep's inner yard, the torches, the river valley below. The river was running high with snowmelt, catching the torchlight in broken pieces as it moved. In another month, the fields below the ridge would begin. She had seen the plans, had helped him with the correspondence, knew the names of the farmers who worked them, and what each field had yielded the last 3 seasons. She knew this territory. She had come to know it the way you came to know a face, not all at once, but detail by detail, each small thing adding to a whole that became eventually impossible to see as anything other than what it was. She knew when he was troubled before he said anything. She knew the particular quality of his silence when something required thinking through versus the silence that meant it was done. She turned. He was watching her. "Caelion Draveth," she said. She had not said his full name before. She was not sure he had noticed, but she suspected he had, because he noticed everything. "I'll stay," she said. It was not the first time she had said it, but it was the first time she had said it knowing all the things it meant, the archive and the cold and 12 years of accumulated weight he carried. The locked rooms in him she might spend the rest of her life learning to walk into. Aldrich's choice, and what forgiveness looked like when it was not complete, but was all anyone had. Isolde and Luca and Finn, and Bridget and the whole living organism of a territory that had been running on one man's steady attention. She said it knowing all of that. And for the first time, the first actual, complete time, he smiled. Not large, not dramatic, the particular quality of a man who has held something back so long that when he finally lets it happen it looks new, because for him it is, warm and genuine and slightly surprised, as if even he had not been certain he could still do it. Like frozen ground meeting the first sun, she thought. Not an event, just a fact, just warmth after a very long winter. She crossed the room to him. She had stopped moving. She was aware of this in the way you became aware of things that changed slowly, not in a single moment, but over a series of them, each small, each permanent. She knew the roads out of Thornwall by the ice they collected at different times of day. She knew that Luca had abandoned the Frankish kings for Norse navigators and changed his drawings accordingly. She knew that Caelion read until 2 in the morning when something troubled him and would say nothing until he had turned it over enough to have an opinion, and that the best thing she could do when she saw the light under his door was to put a cup of something warm outside it and say nothing. She knew the library window caught the afternoon light in the last week of March. She knew he had given her the north window instead, and when she'd asked him about it, he had said, with the smallest possible smile, that the library window was always going to be there. She kept the cloak. It hung on the door of the room. She had stopped calling the room and started calling her room, which was a thing she had noticed and chosen not to examine too closely, because some things were true before you were ready to have them be true. Caelion Draveth, for the first time in 12 years, had begun. Not announced. He did not do things dramatically. He simply started sitting beside her without purpose, telling her things of no strategic value, coming to find her in the archive, when nothing in the archive required him personally. He did not explain himself. He did not need to. He had started, in small and deliberate increments, to let someone know him. Not entirely, not all at once, but in the way that was the only honest way it could happen, one word at a time, one shared hour at a time. The architecture of it built the same way he built everything, slowly, with attention, with the understanding that what was built carefully was what lasted. Sarah had stayed. Her brother Pell had arrived thin and quiet from 7 months in Gerath's cells, and it had taken another month for the quiet to become something other than the residue of fear. He was working in the South Fields now. Sarah had become Isolde's left hand in the keep's management, carrying a quiet efficiency that came from having survived something and emerged the other side of it with the decision already made to use the survival for something. Aldrich had come back from Gareth with Liza, and a silence that was different from his previous silences. Not the silence of a man carrying a secret, but the silence of a man who had paid a price and was living in the aftermath of the payment. Caelion had not forgiven him yet, not fully, but he had also kept his word. The debt was being paid in service, and the conversation about everything else had been postponed until the postponing no longer served anything. It would come. Elara thought when it did, it would hurt them both and leave them closer than before, the way things did when you finally said the true thing and found the other person still standing there. She thought about these things in the mornings before the keep woke fully, when the light was the grey-blue of just before dawn, and the archive smelled of cold stone and old parchment, and the day hadn't yet claimed its full weight of task. She thought about them the way her father had said to think about difficult things, not to resolve them immediately, but to hold them in mind long enough to understand their shape. The door opened. She didn't look up. She knew the sound of him by now. "There's a message from Aldrich," she said. "On the left side of the desk. He and Liza arrived at the South Garrison this morning." A pause. "You read it already?" It was on top. She turned a page. "She's well." She heard him cross the room, pick up the letter, read it, set it down. "Elara?" She looked up. He was standing at the desk with the letter in his hand, and the expression that was still, after 3 months, the hardest to read. Not quite controlled, not quite open. The one in between. The one she was learning the language of one word at a time. She was learning the language of one word at a time. She had more of the vocabulary now than she'd had in January. She suspected she would have more in June, and more still after that. The dictionary of him building in the way dictionaries built. Not complete, never complete, but richer every time she turned the page. "Come to the library tonight," he said. "I need your opinion on the boundary survey maps." "I've an opinion on the boundary survey maps right now, if you want it." "Tonight," he said. There was something in the word that had nothing to do with boundary survey maps. She did not smile where he could see her. She waited until he turned back toward the door, and then let it happen. Brief and private and entirely her own, the same way the best things were, real first, named later, understood over time. "Tonight," she said. The door closed softly. Outside the window, the river moved on toward the valley, carrying the last of the winter in it, and the morning light was the particular gold that came only in the last weeks before full spring. Not summer yet, not winter, but the precise and transient territory between them, when everything was still becoming and nothing had yet become what it would be. She had stopped moving, and he, for the first time in 12 years, had begun.